Hello there. Today we're exploring and analyzing the game Limbo, released in 2008, which I like to describe as an atmospheric puzzle platformer developed by the Danish studio Playdead. It belongs to the very niche category of artistic games, although I do believe personally that all games are pieces of art in some way or the other. Nevertheless, it went on to receive critical acclaim and left behind a legacy and impact that is still going strong, and if you're yet to try it out for yourself, I'll recommend you do so before watching the video. Just go at it blind without looking up any guides or reviews or any other sort of information. The game is extremely short and will require you anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, depending on how good you are with puzzle games. However, if you do not wish to play it or have played it already, let's continue on with the video. We'll discuss the amazing art, story and the themes of Limbo, as well as the technical details and engineering that made it universally loved by both the audience and critics alike. Content warning: this video deals with the descriptions of death, loss and sadness, and of course, spoilers for Limbo. Let's first discuss the narrative and the story. The game begins with a boy lying in a lush, monochromatic forest. As the camera slowly zooms in, the boy opens his eyes and will hand it over the control. The thing that strikes out to me first and foremost is the composition, the design and art style of the game. It's dark. The only things that we see are silhouettes of the boy, the ground and the grass we walk on, pitted against the light flowing in from the background, giving it a light boxy look, or as if we are in some sort of a terrarium on some omnipotent creature's shelf. We are plunged into an environment that essentially looks like a visual representation of the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel, a personification of a candle being snuffed out, as if this is how your eyes would perceive this world as you leave this mortal coil. Secondly, the controls are quite simplistic. We solely rely on moving up and down, left or right. There's a jump button and a grab interact button, and you'll be using these buttons to solve various puzzles throughout the entire game in order to progress. We encounter a giant spider that we defeat by maneuvering around a bear trap that gets triggered when the spider senses and attacks us. However, while fleeing, we get trapped in its web and then are quickly wrapped around in its swathing band. We still somehow manage to liberate ourselves from being devoured, and during the escape we fall and roll down a mountain, which in the process also rids us of the spiderweb cocoon, except for a little bit that is stuck at the back of our head, foreshadowing something which we'll soon discover. As we progress further, we see what happens to be a corpse or a puppet, and upon getting nearer, the ground caves in, and looking up at it, dangling around, I thought that was a piñata. And if the game wasn't so gloomy and brooding, you wouldn't be mistaken for assuming so. An observation also made in this popular video by Dorkly that I'll link on top. Marking the territory of our first antagonistic force in the game are a few cut trees acting as platforms and piñatas on sticks. The boys have created and operate various contraptions to keep invaders out, and as we're escaping their little settlement, the spider returns but is quickly dispatched with a boulder to the face. However, it rises from the ashes again, but only slightly deformed, and we use its body to make over a spike pit. After which we encounter this. Someone walking around towards us with something stuck to its head. Unable to stop, he drowns. Following which, we quite morbidly use his body to make it past the water. We encounter a boy waiting on the other side of the trap for us to fall in. After solving this puzzle as well, we see even more traps, and when these boys appeared the first time, I didn't even feel like they posed any threat till I got hit with a blow dart, even after all the prior grisly incidents. With their oversized helmets, they seem like children playing soldiers in their garden. But this is no ordinary garden. During this entire sequence, we've slowly transitioned from a lush forest to a small industrial area, and then back into the forest, after which we have our first little tussle with a mind-controlled slug that compels us to walk in one direction and one direction only, However, it doesn't like light and will make us switch direction as soon as we make contact with it. Still, the only way to beat this luck permanently is to feed it to these worms hanging about, which will happily chomp down on it if you manage to get it within their reach. Leading to one of my favorite events in the game. Frog-like creature looking appetizingly at some mushrooms. It is wary of us and will scurry away and approach. In order to solve the puzzle, we'll lure the innocent creature, scare, chase and trap him into essentially being a cog in the machine for perpetual servitude, just to summon the rains and create a path for us. And even in this grim setting, I find this to be one of the worst imaginable fates, perhaps because the metaphor hits so damn close. Anyways, now we've entered the sewers, and there isn't much to write home about here. This area is simply put a series of puzzles whose labyrinthine guts we escape by operating various valves, jumping across abyssal pits, and reaching the city. And now we're in the most iconic place of the game, the hotel sign, which while offering some eye candy, doesn't offer much in terms of puzzle. The city is desolate, empty and lifeless, seems like someone's memory of a city. Even without explicitly stating anything, I can sense that the boy, or the developers vicariously through the boy, don't really hold the city life in a very high regard. Although this is just a speculation of mine. Some people suggest that something bad happened to the boy here before his death, resulting in this gloomy memory, or perhaps the boy didn't himself ever go to a city, but learned of it through descriptions by his parents. Now we're entering the second half of the game, which honestly isn't very heavy when it comes to the narrative, which takes a backseat as the puzzles hop on the wheel, which I wouldn't have minded if the narrative at least rode shotgun to the gameplay, but it seems rather stuck at the boot instead. However, that isn't to say that it's completely absent from the game. After grinding many puzzles involving giant machinery in a factory setting, we emerge back into the forest and see a girl picking flowers underneath a treehouse-like structure, but as soon as we're about to approach her, a slug tumbles around in the pipe and plops right onto our head, making us change directions. We do catch many glimpses of a treehouse in the background afterwards, and also during a gravity puzzle. There's a tire swing that responds to the gravity acting as a visual aid, which we end up landing on, albeit a massive version. The environment at this point has become a simulacrum of bits and pieces taken all over from previous areas, juxtaposed next to each other, which you might think would look jarring, but somehow ends up working pretty well in my opinion. After being swished around and tumbled right, we're ejected out and... As we slowly make our way forward, we see the girl again. However, this time there are no slugs to stop our advance. The sounds of our footsteps hits her ears. She jolts up, and the screen fades to black. Now this facet of the game has been a point of endless debate and has cleaved the discourse into two camps, including the critics. One that claims that the story is amazing and its open-ended nature tends to evoke a sense of intrigue and wonder. On the other hand, for some, the deliberate vagueness leaves a lot to be desired, making the story feel contrived and inexact in its messaging. I for one fall in the former camp. I absolutely adore stories that leave its interpretation up to the reader, being forthright in its setting and basis, yes, providing breadcrumbs albeit in a large quantity for the intricate details, and yet at the same time making the reader draw their own conclusion, akin to providing great quality ingredients, but leaving the recipe or the dish up to the user. So, according to my own personal interpretation, the girl and the boy are most likely siblings. In my headcanon, the girl dies due to the ladder to the treehouse breaking during a climb, and as we see in the post-credit scene, where we can observe a broken ladder. The boy sometime later dies in a car crash, being thrown out of the window of the car, symbolized by the scene of him breaking through the glass at the end, reuniting with his sister, as right underneath the broken ladder are two swarms of flies and what seems to be human remains. All the events and the entities of Limbo, this game world, are a recreation or perhaps the manifestation of his memories, fears and anxieties from his life. He's unable to swim, signifying his fear of water or simply a lack of swimming ability. Something I can relate to as a person with thalassophobia, and yet I learned how to swim in the dark, terrifying waters of a lake, facing my fears. And maybe facing your fears is the whole point of this Limbo. The older hostile boys that we encounter embodying perhaps the bullies he faced when he was alive, or simply a lack of self-esteem, can also indicate how, as kids, we tend to play a lot of adult games, building castles, marking our territory, making war. However, here, the juvenile versions of these games have been turned into a much darker reality. The giant spider, a symbol of his arachnophobia, which, as a side note, one of the creators of the game, Art Jensen, commented, stems from his own arachnophobia. He grew up in a farm surrounded by forests, which inspired the forest area of this game, and he loved exploring them. And interestingly, he had an intense hatred for small animals like insects and parasites. His disdain is clearly apparent in the various insect-like creatures, the little slug gobblers, and I digress, they do look quite unnerving to me as well. And of course the giant mosquito that is chowing down some succulent animal remains evoked some primordial fear in me. Well, speaking of parasites, I believe the little slugs that latch onto your head and compel you to only walk a certain direction serve as a metaphor for lack of control, maybe a fear of losing one's individuality. And if the theory of the girl dying after her fall is correct, I theorized that the boy harbors some form of guilt over his inability to save her. We do see this little butterfly in various parts of the game beckoning us to her, serving as a guide to help us reunite in the edge of hell. Another minor but noteworthy element is the boy's physical prowess. We, while controlling him, are able to jump leaps and bounds, climb ropes, which by the way is a fairly hard thing to do, shimmy over ledges, balance on a boulder like a circus act while being completely covered in spiderwebs, lift and drag heavy objects. While you could claim them as being important to creating interesting gameplay, I like to believe that these aspects convey the boy's active lifestyle, and I think he and his sister spent considerable time in their family farm or their garden, and her death has haunted him ever since. Or perhaps I'm running on a tangent, you be the judge. The game has a fairly open-ended story and ending, and you're free to make your own interpretation, which I'll happily read down in the comments. So what exactly is Limbo? The word limbo comes from the Latin word limbus, which means edge or boundary, also possibly from Proto-Indo-European word limb, meaning to hang loosely, also where the words limb and limp come from. So what does it have to do with the game? Well, limbo is used to refer to the edge of hell, a place where the souls of the dead went who didn't exactly deserve hell, but at the same time hadn't been free from the original sin, so not deserving of heaven either. Limbo is divided into three distinct parts: limbo of the damned, limbo of the patriarchs, and limbo of the infants, which is pertinent to this game. Limbo of the infants is the residence of souls that were parted from the body in infancy while being unbaptized, and there exists a lot of uncertainty in the teachings, so scholars are divided. one cannot talk about hell without mentioning Dante's Divine Comedy, and in particular its first part, Dante's Inferno, a narrative poem by the Italian poet Dante Alighieri that describes a journey through hell, which is divided into 9 distinct circles, where the souls of the damned are kept for eternity, depending upon their sin. The first circle is called Limbo, reserved for the unbaptized and non-Christians, who are not tortured, but instead live in a never-ending, unsatiated desire for salvation. Dante supposedly did take inspiration from Elysium or the Elysian Plains while describing Limbo, which in Greek mythology serves as an afterlife for the righteous, the heroic, and the ones chosen by God, where they live in peace and happiness for eternity, pursuing whatever they desired and indulged in when they were alive. So if you were a farmer, for example, and loved farming, you'd be farming for eternity. Sounds nice, I guess. He describes various Greek philosophers and poets, his contemporaries like Homer, Socrates, Horace, Ovid, and many others as being stuck in limbo, suffering unending desire. How very convenient. As a side note, Ovid tells the story of Arachne in his own epic poem Metamorphosis, a great weaver that challenged the goddess Athena to a weaving contest. Athena, unable to beat her in weaving, beats the quote-unquote arrogance out of her with the girl's own shuttle. Arachne later self-deletes out of shame, and Athena, feeling sorry for her, turns her into a spider so she may weave for as long as her heart desires. And this is supposed to be a cautionary tale about hubris. Not Athena's, by the way, but Arachne's. Okay? Leave my spider queen alone, she did nothing wrong. Although some scholars believe Ovid was portraying the oppressive nature of authority, forbidding her from practicing her art, as Ovid himself was exiled by the Emperor Augustus. He likened the art of weaving to the art of poetry. Anyways, Dante also mentions Arachne in Canto 17th while describing the grotesque monster Grayon. Is this anyway relevant? Not much, I just wanted to talk about spiders in Greek mythology. Speaking of Greek mythology, there's one particular scene in the beginning where we cross a small lake or a body of water on a boat, doing nothing, just taking in the view, which to me appeared as the souls of the dead being carried across the river Styx, and the boy appearing as if Charon, the ferryman that transports the souls to the underworld. Charon appears in Dante's Inferno as well, beating the souls of the reluctant with his oar into getting onto the boat. Before I continue, I like to say that these illustrations you see, not the ones, those are mine, were done by the French artist Gustave Doré, who is in my eyes one of the greatest illustrators to ever live, and if you haven't checked out his work before, I highly recommend you do so. Another piece of media that distinctly comes to mind when I think of Limbo is the animated miniseries Over the Garden Wall, and if you haven't seen the series yet, I implore you to watch it and experience, selon moi, the greatest representation of Limbo. Well, spoilers ahead for Over the Garden Wall. This animated series is heavily intertwined with Dante's Inferno and Purgatorio, the main character Word being a poet clad in red, similar to Dante being led around the edge of hell by someone named Beatrice. And just like in the game, we begin in a dark, lush forest and encounter otherworldly phenomena, shrouded in mystery, obtaining very few answers that could shed some light onto this bizarre setting. By the way, the character of the beast might as well be from Limbo, its art style being heavily evocative of the game. Furthermore, the older brother Vert is able to save his little brother Greg from drowning alongside him after their journey through Limbo, something I think perhaps you could say the boy from the game is also able to do so, or maybe unable to do so. I for one can draw many parallels between the themes and characters of the show and the game. When Limbo was released, initially it had the tagline, "Uncertain of his sister's fate, a boy enters Limbo." hinting at perhaps a game where we try to save our sister. Similarly, in the show, both boys try to save each other from losing their soul to the beast. Wirt, who is a meek, indecisive and insecure person in real life, becomes the hero in multiple situations, showing a level of growth required in order to go back home. However, it's very hard to discern exactly, but what is not hard is recommending this series, which in fact is amazing. Even if you didn't heed the spoiler warning, I don't believe anything has been spoiled here. You should still check out the show. It's very short and can easily binge it in one sitting. So, that was the wonderful art and meaning behind the game Limbo. Now let's discuss the engineering. As I mentioned before, the controls are quite simple and the puzzles are varied, and I didn't find them to be particularly difficult per se, just stimulating. However, quite a few of them required a modicum of effort and planning with near perfect timing. And I'd say it's very difficult, if not downright impossible, to finish the game for the first time without dying at least a few times. It is heavily based on a lot of trial and error, and you're expected to die after making the wrong choice. Although when you do die, the checkpoints are frequent and the save file loads quickly to get you right back to try again. Additionally, what's truly impressive is the fact that none of the puzzles repeat themselves. Sure, they share elements with each other, but all the puzzles in this game have a sense of variety that keeps the experience fresh and engaging. The idea for the game was born into the mind of Arndt Jensen after he started getting disillusioned with his job as a concept artist in IO Interactive, the creators of the popular game series Hitman. He started drawing sketches of a secret place, but without the boy, and the idea for a game was born. He tried his hand at programming using Visual Basic but wasn't quite successful, so then created a trailer as basically a job offer to ask programmers to join him. However, what he didn't expect was the trailer to go viral, and with that finding many interested parties. One of those people being Dino Patti, a programmer who was also burned out from his job at an advertising company, and together they formed Playdead. During development, they realized that this game would require more people and hired Jeppe Carlsen, a talented programmer that started to work on the game's engine. So it looks exactly right, just as Jensen imagined. I mentioned that the puzzles do not repeat themselves, and that is by design. During development, if two puzzles that weren't identical yet had a similar method of solving them, they would take the better one and scrap the other, and in the process getting rid of about 70% of their ideas and work. They created the puzzles in isolation, and then Jensen insisted that there be a natural flow from one puzzle to the other, so that it doesn't give the feeling of just being a puzzle simulator, throwing you into one after the other, even though that's what the game is in a nutshell. Previously, when I talked about the narrative taking a backseat to the gameplay in the second half, that was due to the fact that Jensen was a lot more involved with the first half of the game, and Jeppe the programmer ended up creating, in Jensen's words, hardcore puzzles, which tended to favor gameplay over story. In fact, the spider was supposed to appear alongside the gravity puzzle and not at the beginning of the game, but they couldn't just figure out how to make it right, eventually scrapping the idea. Jensen does regret the lack of oversight in the second half from his part and claims he will have a lot more next time. A game that I will make a video on someday. And later on, as the project kept getting on larger and larger, so did their team, and they ended up getting grants from the Danish government itself, which led them to hiring a lot of freelancers, and you can see the impact of their work here. The game to me never feels unnatural, and it's a game that relies a lot on feels, as you have no button prompts, no tutorials, no hints or objective markers. It trusts your own judgment in order to navigate this world and interact with its elements. Let's take the first area itself as an example. The game uses the darkest and the deepest shadows to make it clear which elements are in the foreground and are intractable, as there is no other marker. As you encounter the bear traps, the game wants you to either A. try jumping only to your death, or B, through previous times you've jumped, gauge that the width is not traversable. So you press the only other button, interact, and realize that the traps can be grabbed and moved. The next time you encounter the trap, you understand that you need to position it underneath the carcass so that it gets trapped inside, snapping the rope and increasing its height so you make it across. Well, kudos to the developers for making an indie game that doesn't look realistic in the slightest, feel realistic. And that was largely in part thanks to its physics and the animations. Later in the game, during a puzzle, we're playing around with gravity and are supposed to make a box lying on a slope, basically jump across an obstruction. The only tools you have being the gravity switch. Now, my mind instantly went to making the box slide down, then flipping the gravity and then flipping it again before it hits the ceiling, using its own momentum to make it fly. And never did the thought come into my mind that it might not work, something that was reinforced by the fact that physics have felt natural and realistic during the entire run. This puzzle is a part of a larger one, and I must admit, this is the only puzzle that I was stuck on for quite a while, unable to decode how to make it past the two moving platforms with just one box. The only way I was able to figure it out was by harkening back to the lessons taught previously. Right at the beginning of the game, when you see this body of water with a singular floating box, your first instinct is to push it down and make a floating platform, but you realize that it is futile because, again, the physics are realistic. The box flips over if you jump on it when it's in the water, and you start exploring other ways to utilize it. That is, using it to reach the hanging rope, climbing the tree and look for something. A weakened trunk works well, and you push it and drop it down, using it as the floating platform in order to jump across. The very next puzzle instills the same habit, although this time it additionally utilizes sound as a hint. During the encounter with the spider, upon repeated thumps by it on the ground, you hear a clank of the bear trap that you spotted earlier hitting the ground. We already know that the bear traps are movable and snap when triggered, so you do a quick 1+1 in your head and solve the puzzle. And an understanding of the game develops, thanks to which I was able to spot the little area above the machines and realizes that if I wanted to proceed, I needed to explore every nook and cranny. Another thing that I like to talk about is the amazing sound design of this game. It has minimal ambient or no soundtrack at all, but that doesn't mean that there is no music. Well, according to the game's sound designer, Martin Stig Andersen, who has a background in acousmatic and electroacoustic music, so he does not rely on any traditional instruments to create the music, but instead fiddles and manipulates sounds of the game environment itself. And this music is not supposed to be played with an instrument, but rather composed for speakers. So when you play most games, you tend to hear some sort of boss music when you're fighting a strong enemy, while in Limbo, when the player encounters the spider, the only parallel to a boss character that I can draw, the sounds of the howling winds get muted and overshadowed in its presence and are replaced with this eerie, subtle hum. And when I played this game back in 2011, I had just begun my audiophile journey, and I bought some relatively cheap yet punchy Audio-Technica headphones, and this was the very first time I played using them. And as soon as the spider hits the ground with its legs, I heard the rustle of the soil and the boom of the impact, and I was genuinely blown away. The sounds of the machines, switches, your feet as they run across various materials, be it wood, metal, or soil, The sounds of the insects, especially the mosquito. Levers being pulled. Metal gates being closed. Gears moving into place. And so much more are excellently implemented, adding to the believability of the game and its world. Another example as given by the composer himself is during the hotel sign. He purposefully added some electric hums to the background music to emphasize and at the same time integrate the buzzing and crackling of the electricity running through it. Even the game's ambiguous nature carries over to the sound design of the game. One of the main reasons for a lack of a traditional soundtrack is due to the creators' insistence for a natural experience. They wanted you to feel what you feel without being directed or manipulated by scary or sad music, evoking these emotions in you. And I wish more games did that. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely adore gaming soundtracks, but I often feel bogged down or restricted in my interpretation of an area or event in a video game by the soundtrack that accompanies it. It can definitely add to the emotional impact, but for a game like Limbo, I am absolutely certain that this was the right approach. So now that we have discussed the various elements of the game, it's no wonder that it has been highly lauded and distinguished in the annals of video game history. Even though it makes me feel weird to say history for a game released in 2010, but it has been 15 years. It is one of the top contenders of games that are considered pieces of art, especially when it was released. Whenever the topic of video game graphics is touched, the idea of art direction over graphical fidelity is raised, and rightly so. A realistic game using the greatest technology of its time does not age as well as a game with good graphics, but an amazing art direction. Take the example of games like Shadow of the Colossus, Journey, Okami, Ori and the Blind Forest, and of course, Limbo. It is a testament to the human ingenuity, vision, and collaboration, and the sheer tenacity to create something unique while treading a path not taken before. If you're still watching, well, thank you. And if you enjoyed it, do take the time to like, share and subscribe. This is my first video, and if you have any feedback for me, I'll be happy to read it down in the comment section. Auf Wiedersehen!